On my daughter's wedding day, the man she married already had a wife. You heard me right. Not a fiancé. Not an ex. A wife. And a little girl who called him daddy. I carried that truth in my chest for almost 50 years. It turned holidays into battlefields, phone calls into landmines, and my own voice into a stranger I barely recognized. Tonight, I'm going to tell you everything. What really happened that perfect June afternoon. What the betrayal was. Who knew? Who stayed silent? Who paid the price? And whether a wound like that can ever truly heal. Because this isn't just a story about a wedding gone wrong. It's about the way a single lie can bend the shape of an entire family. I'm Margaret, but most people just call me Grandma Maggie. And if you're hearing this, maybe you've felt that kind of silence in your own family, the kind where everyone pretends nothing is wrong while the room hums with everything left unsaid. Have you ever sat at a dinner table and felt the air get heavier when a certain name came up? Or watched two people who used to be close pass each other like strangers? That was my house, for decades. And it all began on the day my daughter Lily walked down the aisle in a white lace dress that we both thought would keep her safe. Let me take you back. It was June of 1974. The kind of hot where the air felt thick with sunlight, where the pavement outside the church shimmered and the roses in the front yard leaned toward the shade. Inside our small-town church, everything smelled of beeswax and lilies. We'd tied pale blue ribbons to the ends of the pews. The organist was rehearsing the same line of Canon in D over and over, and every time she hit that one high note, my heart fluttered. Lily was in the back room with me, standing in front of the full-length mirror that had seen every bride in our family before her. Her dress was simple, a soft A-line that moved when she did, lace sleeves that brushed her wrists. She kept smoothing the fabric like she was afraid it might disappear. "Do I look all right, Mom?" she asked. Her voice had that tight little tremor in it, the one she used to get before piano recitals. "You look like a promise," I told her. And I meant it. Lily was my oldest. The child who helped me hang laundry and peel potatoes and keep her little brother in line when her father worked late. She had always done the right thing. Top of her class, Sunday school teacher, never missed curfew. And now here she was, marrying Charles Whitaker. Tall, dark-haired, charming in that slightly distracted way some men have, like they're always half a step ahead of you. He came from a family with money and a last name that made people in our town sit a little straighter. His mother, Ruth, carried herself like she was gliding instead of walking. His father had his name on store signs. When they first came to dinner at our house, I watched Charles watch Lily. The way he leaned in when she spoke, the way he laughed at things that weren't all that funny just to keep her talking. I thought, she will be adored. I wish I had trusted my unease as much as I trusted his smile. Even that morning, a few threads in the perfect picture were just slightly out of place. The first wrong note came when the hairdresser knocked on the dressing room door, breathless. "Your father's not here yet," she said. "Pastor Allen's asking about the processional order." Lily frowned. "Dad's always early." She was right. Frank, my husband, her father, was a man who arrived everywhere 15 minutes before he needed to. He ironed his socks. He counted fork tines at restaurants without realizing he was doing it. "He probably just stopped to get more film for the camera," I said. I didn't believe it. The second wrong note, Ruth. When I'd peeked into the vestibule earlier, she'd been on the church hallway phone, whispering sharply, one manicured hand pressed so hard to her temple her knuckles had gone white. "No, you listen to me," she'd hissed. "You will not ruin this for him. Or for us." The moment she saw me, she hung up, her face smoothing out like a curtain dropped on a stage. "Just last-minute catering," she'd said with a tight smile. But I'd been a mother long enough to recognize the look of someone trying to hold too many things together at once. Still, the music started. Guests shuffled to their seats. The ushers straightened their ties. "Ready?" I whispered to Lily, pinning the last stubborn piece of veil into place. Her hands were shaking so badly that a streak of lipstick had smeared on the rim of the water glass beside her. "Nervous is good," I said lightly. "It means you know this matters." I straightened the tiny row of buttons down her back and kissed her bare shoulder. If I had known what waited on the other side of those double doors, would have wrapped my arms around her and never let her walk through. The music swelled. The ushers opened the doors. But her father's place at her side was still empty. "Where is he?" Lily whispered, panic darting across her eyes. Guests were already turning around in their seats to look. The aisle stretched out like a mile of expectation. "I'll find him," I said. "Just wait here." I gathered my skirt in trembling hands and hurried down the side corridor behind the sanctuary, the cool stone floor almost slippery under my heels. That corridor always smelled faintly of damp hymnals and old wood, the dust of all the sermons it had heard. Voices echoed from the little anteroom where the men waited before ceremonies, Pastor Allen's gentle baritone, someone else's sharper tone layered over it. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't my husband arguing with the pastor. It was Charles. And he wasn't alone. Through the small crack of the half-closed door, I saw Charles standing with his back to me, shoulders tense. Facing him was a woman I had never seen before. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot, as if she'd rushed out of the house without finishing it. Her dress was wrinkled like she'd been sitting in a car for hours. In one hand, she clutched a manila envelope that looked like it had been opened and closed too many times. "I am your wife," she was saying, her voice thick with swallowed tears. "You can't marry her. This is a crime, Charles. It's bigamy." The word hit me like a physical slap. I froze, one hand on the doorframe. "Wife." He took a step toward her, lowering his voice. "Joanna, I told you, the papers are filed. The divorce is a formality. You know this. You promised you wouldn't do this today." She shoved the envelope at his chest so hard he stumbled. "Filed isn't final," she said. "You are still legally married to me." "And what about Emily? Are you going to pretend she doesn't exist too?" A small movement in the corner of the room caught my eye. There, half hidden behind Joanna's skirt, stood a little girl. 4, maybe 5. Dark curls, a yellow cardigan too warm for the June heat, white socks folded neatly above scuffed black shoes. Her hand was clutching the hem of her mother's dress, but her eyes never left Charles. There was no mistaking it, those eyes were the same warm hazel as his. "Daddy," she whispered. "Why are you mad at Mommy?" I felt the world tilt. The organ in the sanctuary kept playing its calm, looping melody, oblivious, while my heart pounded so loudly I was sure someone would hear it. My son-in-law-to-be. With a wife. And a little girl. On Lily's wedding day. And then, as if summoned by my horror, someone else stepped into view. Frank. My husband. He must have come in from the side door. His tie was already straightened, his hair combed with that same precise line I'd seen every workday of our marriage. "Enough," he said. Just that one word, but I heard the steel in it. "Margaret's in the hall," Pastor Allen murmured, glancing toward the door where I still stood, frozen. And suddenly, the scene rearranged itself. Charles turned halfway, Joanna's eyes flicked toward me, Pastor Allen's face went pale. Frank took 3 strides forward and shut the door firmly, inches from my nose. The latch clicked. On the other side, voices dropped, urgent, panicked, muffled. I stood there with my palm against the cool wood, feeling like a child eavesdropping and a mother about to drown, both at once. Every part of me wanted to fling the door open, grab Lily, and run. But the music was still playing. Guests were still waiting. My daughter was alone at the back of the church in a white dress, wondering where her father was. What would you have done? Would you have burst in and torn the whole day apart? Or would you have waited, just one more minute, hoping somehow there was an explanation that didn't shatter your girl's life? I waited. I wish I hadn't. The door opened suddenly. Frank stepped out, his face set in that tight, careful way he used when bills were past due or the car needed a repair we couldn't afford. "Where is Lily?" he asked. "In the back, waiting for you," I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. "What is going on, Frank?" He glanced over his shoulder into the room. Just for a heartbeat, I saw Charles sitting on a chair, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. Joanna stood rigid, the envelope crushed in her fist. The child had disappeared from view. "Not here," Frank muttered. He took my arm, not gently, not roughly, just firmly, and steered me away from the door. "Frank," I hissed. "Tell me. Who is that woman? Who is that little girl?" His jaw worked. "Later," he said. "We don't have time. The guests are waiting." "The guests?" I repeated. "Our daughter is about to marry a man who—" He stopped and turned to face me, his hands gripping my shoulders. His fingers dug into my skin through the thin fabric of my dress. "Margaret. Listen to me. No, Hon, no, Mags. Just my full name, like I was a student and he was the teacher. If we stop this wedding now, do you know what happens? The whole town will know. Lily will be humiliated. Charles's family will destroy us. You think Ruth will just sit back and let us drag their name through the mud? His father practically owns this city block. Humiliations heal," I whispered. "This might not." He closed his eyes, then opened them with a decision made. "They'll sort it," he said. "The papers are already filed. Pastor Allen says they can rush the process. Charles made a mistake, but he loves her. He swore to it." "And the child?" I asked. "That little girl?" For a moment, something flickered across his face. He looked older. "She's his responsibility," he said. "He'll provide for her." By pretending she doesn't exist? By not destroying two families in one afternoon, he snapped. "We can't fix what's been done. We can only decide what happens next. Do you want to see Lily left at the altar?" I thought of my daughter, alone in that little room at the back. Her trembling hands. The lipstick smear on the glass. The way she'd looked at herself in the mirror like she was stepping into a dream. I felt something inside me crumple and harden, all at once. "Does Lily know?" I asked. Silence. "Does she know, Frank?" "No," he said. "And she doesn't have to. Not today. Not today." Those two words became a curse in my life. We walked back to the dressing room. Frank stepped up beside Lily, offered his arm like nothing was wrong. I watched her slip her hand into the crook of his elbow, trusting completely. "Everything all right?" she asked me, eyes flicking between us. "Just a little mix-up with the photographer," I lied. The first stone placed in the wall of silence I would build around us. They started down the aisle to the swell of the organ. I walked behind her, holding her train. Halfway down, Lily's head turned ever so slightly. Her gaze snagged on something, or someone, near the back of the church. Her shoulders stiffened. I followed her line of sight. There, standing in the shadow of a pillar at the very back, was Joanna. Her hair now hastily smoothed, a borrowed hat perched unsteadily on her head. She held the little girl's hand. Emily, I would later learn. The child's eyes were wide, taking in the flowers, the candles, the sea of faces. But she wasn't looking at Charles. She was looking at Lily. And there was something like heartbreak in that tiny face. Lily's fingers tightened on her father's arm. "Who is that?" she whispered, too quietly for anyone but me to hear. "A cousin from out of town," Frank murmured without missing a step. I saw the lie land in Lily's eyes like a bruise. Do you know that feeling when you sense you're standing on a thin sheet of ice, and somewhere beneath you something is cracking, but everyone keeps telling you it's fine? That was the look on my daughter's face as she said her vows. The ceremony itself went on like a play everyone had agreed to perform. "Do you, Charles Whitaker, take this woman?" he said, "I do," in a clear voice that rang against the rafters. Only I heard the slight catch on the word woman, as if his tongue stumbled over the number. "Do you, Lillian Cooper, take this man?" She said, "I do," with tears in her eyes, not all of them joy. When the pastor said, "If anyone here knows of a lawful impediment," I felt my knees go weak. There was a full second of silence where the whole church inhaled. I imagined Joanna's hand tightening on her daughter's. No one spoke. Not Charles. Not Ruth. Not my husband. Not even Pastor Allen, who knew as much as I did. And not me. That was the moment the betrayal became mine too. They kissed. The congregation erupted into applause. Rice would later be thrown, cake would be cut, photographs would be taken of smiles that did not reach certain eyes. But even before the reception, the breaking had already begun. In the church basement hall, the reception smelled of fried chicken, potato salad, and the syrupy sweetness of the punch my sister always made too strong. White streamers hung from the low ceiling. The band, a trio of local boys who played weddings for beer money, was tuning up in the corner. Lily's friends clustered around her, squealing over her ring, her dress, the way Charles couldn't seem to keep his eyes off her. "They're perfect together," someone whispered behind me. I wanted to turn and ask, perfect compared to what? Instead, I smiled, refilled the punch bowl, adjusted centerpieces that were already straight. Across the room, Charles was in deep conversation with Ruth and my husband. Ruth's lips were thin, Frank's hands were shoved deep in his pockets. Every so often, Charles's eyes flicked toward the door. I noticed, then, that Joanna and the little girl were nowhere in sight. Had they left? Been sent away? Were they in the parking lot, car idling, a child crying softly in the back seat while her mother stared at her hands on the wheel, wondering how her life had come to this? The band started a slow song. "First dance," someone called. Lily and Charles moved to the center of the floor. He put a hand on her waist, took her other hand in his. From a distance, they looked like every wedding couple in every photo album, smiling, swaying, leaning into each other. But when Lily's head tipped up toward him, I saw the question in her eyes. Later, she would tell me, I asked him then, "Mom." Right there on the dance floor. I asked who that woman was. But that night, I only saw his lips move, his thumb brushing the back of her hand. She nodded slowly, but the line between her brows never smoothed. He told her it was a distant cousin of his mother's. That the child was shy. That they'd left early, not wanting to intrude. Another lie. Another smooth stone placed on the grave of the truth. The first crack that everyone could see came with the speeches. My husband stood up, cleared his throat, held his glass high. He spoke of Lily's determination, of the way she'd insisted on fixing her own bike chain when she was 9, how she'd always been steady as a rock. Then he turned to Charles. And to Charles, he said. "A man who..." He faltered. Just for a second. It was subtle. Most people laughed it off as emotion. But I saw his throat work, saw his gaze flick, just once, toward the back doors of the hall, as if expecting them to fly open. "Who will stand by her, always," he finished finally. The words hung in the air between us like something fragile and dishonest. Later, Ruth spoke. Her toast was more polished, practiced. But when she said, "May there be no secrets between you," I heard something raw and bitter under the joke. I looked at her, our eyes locking for a beat too long. We were both mothers of the couple now. Both keepers of a fire we'd chosen not to expose. In that moment, I understood, she had known long before that day. She had made her choice too. 2 women, 2 families, welded together by the silence we helped create. That night, when the last guest had gone and the hall smelled only of spilled beer and wilting flowers, I found an empty lipstick-stained champagne coupe still sitting at Lily's place. Her veil lay folded on the back of a chair. Rice clung to the hem of her abandoned dress like small white lies. The newlyweds had driven off in a car painted with "Just Married" in soap, clinking cans trailing behind. Everyone had cheered. Everyone had waved. As the taillights disappeared into the hot June darkness, a thin, high wail had cut through the night from somewhere across the parking lot. A child's cry. No one else seemed to hear it. Or maybe they just chose not to look. I did look. Under the yellow halo of a street lamp, I saw a small figure in a yellow cardigan climbing into the back of an older sedan. Joanna shut the door gently, her shoulders slumped. For a second, she turned, looking back toward the now empty church steps as if expecting someone, anyone, to call her name and ask her to stay. No one did. She got in the driver's seat. The car pulled away. 2 cars driving into the darkness, in opposite directions, on the same night. Both tied to the same man. That was the betrayal, in its most naked form. Not just that Charles had another wife and child. But that, when given the chance to stop everything, almost all of us chose not to. Why did we hide it? People always want a villain in stories like this. They want one bad man, one evil mother-in-law, one scheming stranger. The truth is uglier. It was a web, and we each spun a piece. There was the power of the Whitaker name. Ruth had reminded us, in a quiet corner the next day, that Charles's father employed half our town. That our son worked at his hardware store. That Lily's job at the bank, secured with Charles's father's recommendation, could vanish as quickly as it had appeared. There was a mix-up with the paperwork, Ruth said, her pearls lying like a chain at her throat. The divorce is delayed. But it's already in motion. If anyone asks, you didn't see anything. Frank had folded his arms. We should have been told, he said. And what would you have done? She shot back. Let your daughter walk into that church alone? Have her wear the label of a jilted bride for the rest of her life? People don't forget those stories, Mr. Cooper. They don't tell them kindly. There was the pastor, hands trembling slightly as he poured himself coffee at our kitchen table 2 days later. I believed Charles when he said it would be resolved, Pastor Allen said. I believed the law would see it as close enough. Close enough? I echoed, the words tasting like ash. He looked at his hands instead of my face. The Lord hates divorce, he murmured. But he also hates causing scandal that drives people from the church. The lesser sin, Mrs. Cooper. That's what we all chose here. The lesser sin. Whose sin? Whose lesser? And then there was me. One afternoon, not long after the wedding, I saw an envelope on Frank's desk at home. It had Ruth's handwriting on the front and the name, Joanna Carter, written in the corner. Inside was a typed agreement, no letterhead, just stark words on white paper. Financial support figures. A timetable. A line that read, no contact with Charles or his new family to be initiated by Joanna or her child. There was also a slip of paper with a phone number in blue ink. Under it, in smaller letters, the name Emily. My fingers hovered. All I had to do was remember those digits, pick up the phone later, say, I'm Lily's mother. I saw you. I'm sorry. Tell me your side. Instead, I heard my husband's car in the driveway. Panicked, I did the smallest, meanest thing. I moved the paper to the bottom of the stack. Then I slid it into the back of the desk drawer and shut it. Months later, in a rare fit of cleaning, I found that same scrap by itself on the desk. Without letting myself think, I walked to the kitchen sink, struck a match, and held the edge of the paper to the flame. I watched the neat numbers curl, blacken, vanish. As the ashes drifted into the sink, I told myself I was protecting Lily. Protecting our family from a past it couldn't change. But some nights, lying awake beside my sleeping husband, I could still see a little girl in a yellow sweater standing under a street lamp, watching taillights disappear. The years did not heal what the wedding day had broken. They just taught us new ways to walk around the cracks. The first Christmas after the wedding, Lily and Charles came over with a tin of store-bought cookies in one hand and a tension you could almost taste in the other. Snow clung to their coats. The house smelled of pine needles and cinnamon. Frank had hung mistletoe in the doorway, a tradition he loved. Lily stepped under it and looked at Charles expectantly. He smiled, pecked her on the cheek. It was quick, almost shy. But the way she watched him when he thought she wasn't looking, there was a question there that hadn't been answered. After dinner, while the men watched some bowl game on the television in the den, Lily and I stood at the sink washing dishes. Did you know Charles was married before? She asked suddenly. The plate in my hands nearly slipped. What? I said, too fast. She stared at the soap bubbles, not at me. I found a photo. In one of his boxes when we were unpacking. Him and a woman, younger, at a courthouse. And a little girl on his lap. He said it was a quick thing, years ago, before he knew what he wanted. That it was over. Her voice went smaller. He told me he didn't tell me earlier because he was afraid I'd leave. That he didn't see her anymore, that it was complicated. I gripped the edge of the sink so hard my knuckles ached. Here was my chance. The open door. The moment where the truth could step out into the light. I imagined telling her, yes, I knew. I saw her at your wedding. You weren't his first wife. You weren't his only family. We failed you. Instead, I heard myself say, sometimes people make mistakes when they're young, Lily. What matters is what they choose now. She nodded slowly, but I saw something settle in her. Not peace. Not forgiveness. More like a wary truce with a man she wasn't sure she knew. Years passed. They bought a small house on Birch Street. They had your mother, Claire, 2 years later. I remember the day she was born. I held her for the first time in the hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and baby powder. She looked up at me with hazel eyes. Charles's eyes. I felt a weird doubling, this tiny new life in my arms, and somewhere out there, another girl with the same eyes blowing out birthday candles we would never see. At Lily's kitchen table, when you were 5, you once asked, why don't we see Grandma Ruth very much? Lily stirred sugar into her coffee so long it dissolved twice. Grandma Ruth is busy, she said finally. She has her own traditions. The truth was, Ruth preferred to host her own gatherings, where she could control every story that was told. In her house, there were no photos of Joanna or Emily. In her house, Charles had one wife, one daughter, one perfect life. At ours, the silence about them became its own form of presence. Like an extra chair at the table no one would admit was set. There were bigger scenes too. When you were 10, you spent a week at our house. One night, you woke up thirsty and padded down the hallway. You told me, years later, that you stopped when you heard voices from the kitchen. You lied to me on my wedding day, Charles, Lily's voice said, low and fierce. You let me walk down that aisle without knowing who I was marrying. I told you I'd been married before, he said. We agreed to move past it. You told me after, she snapped. You and my parents and your mother and your pastor, everyone decided what was best for me, and no one thought that should include me. There was the sound of something hitting the table, a glass maybe. I met her, Lily choked. I saw her at the grocery store. She recognized you from a newspaper photo. She said, you're Charles's daughter, aren't you? She looked at Claire and said, you have his eyes, just like my Emily. What was I supposed to say? Silence. Then Charles, it's over, Lily. That life is over. I send the checks. What more do you want? What more, she repeated. I want a husband who didn't build our marriage on a lie. I want parents who didn't help him do it. Your small footsteps must have crunched on the hallway rug then, because the voices went quiet. You told me you ran back to bed, heart pounding, and pretended to be asleep when Lily peeked in. We never talked about that night. Not then. Not for years. That's what silence does, it doesn't just keep the secret in, it keeps the questions out. Silence doesn't heal a wound, it just teaches it to hide. The years marched on, catalogued in little scenes. A Thanksgiving where Lily and Charles sat at opposite ends of the table, speaking through your school stories instead of to each other. A birthday card your mother sent to an address she'd gotten from a friend of a friend, Joanna's, we think, that came back 3 weeks later, stamped in red, returned to sender. A funeral. When Charles's father died, the church was packed again. Different flowers, darker suits, same organ. This time, as we filed out, I saw a woman standing near the back with a young adult beside her. The girl was maybe 20. Same dark curls. Same hazel eyes. She wore a plain black dress, her hands twisted in front of her. Joanna. And Emily, grown. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. Recognition flared in hers, then shuddered. She made no move to approach us. We made no move to approach her. Two branches of the same tree passing like strangers at the roots. On the ride home, Lily stared out the window, her jaw clenched. You knew they'd be there, she said quietly to Charles. He gripped the steering wheel. It was my father's funeral, Lily. She had a right to be there. And I had a right to the truth, she murmured. No one spoke the rest of the drive. There were near-break moments, times when the truth pressed so hard against my ribs I thought it would crack them. Once, when you were a teenager, you sat at my kitchen table while I iced a cake. Why does Mom always get so tense around anniversaries? You asked. My hand shook, the icing forming a jagged line. Some memories are heavy, I said. Even the happy ones. Happy, you snorted. She and Dad barely talk on good days. On their anniversary, it's like they're both trying not to breathe. You looked at me then with those curious hazel eyes. Grandma, is there something about their wedding you've never told me? My heart lurched. Here it was again, the opening. Yes, some honest part of me screamed. Yes, there is. Sit down. Let me tell you who else was in that church. But I saw how young you still were, how heavy that story would be to hand to a girl with exams and crushes and college applications in her near future. So I did what I had always done, I smiled a little too brightly and said, every wedding has its drama, dear. What matters is the years that come after. You rolled your eyes, but you let it go. The moment closed, like a book snapped shut in the middle of a sentence. Decades slid by, carrying babies and graduations, arguments and reconciliations and small truce offerings in the form of casseroles left on porches after fights. Then, as it always does, time turned brutal. Charles was the first to go. Heart attack at 68. Quick, the doctors said. He died on a Tuesday in a hospital room that smelled of bleach and defeat. Lily held his hand until it went cold, love and resentment braided together in her tears. A few years later, my Frank followed. Quietly, in his sleep, one November night when the trees were bare and the radiator clanged in protest. I found, in his desk drawer, a worn folder I'd never seen before. Inside were copies of that old agreement with Joanna. Handwritten notes about checks he'd mailed when Charles forgot. In the margin of one letter, the only letter she'd ever written that we kept, Joanna had scrawled. This isn't about money. It's about my daughter knowing she's real. My hands shook as I read it. Real. Had we acted as if she was real? Or as if she was a problem to be managed, a story to be kept off the family tree? I sat at that desk until the light outside the window went from gray to black, the papers spread around me like accusations. Across town, in your apartment, you were taking a DNA test. Not because of any suspicion, just one of those online kits people sent around as jokes at the office. You wanted to see if the family rumor about Irish blood was true. You spat into a little plastic tube, sealed it, and dropped it in the mailbox, thinking it would be funny if you were secretly part Viking. You had no idea that the past I'd tried to bury on your mother's wedding day was already clawing its way up to meet you. The results came back 3 weeks later. You called me, your voice higher than usual. Grandma, you said. You're not going to believe this. It says I have a close family match. Like, a half-sibling level match. Name's Emily Carter. The room around me blurred. Emily. The name on the burned scrap of paper. The girl under the street lamp. The woman in black at the funeral. Isn't that weird? You went on, oblivious to my silence. Do we have any Carters in the family? My tongue felt thick. Grandma? Maybe you should talk to your mother about it, I managed. Even as I said it, I knew, the years of silence had just run out. Secrets can survive almost anything, death, time, distance. But they rarely survive the internet. That evening, you, your mother, and I sat around Lily's kitchen table. The same table where, years ago, I had lied to her about a photograph in a box. Now, your laptop sat open between us, the screen glowing with the words. Close family match, Emily Carter, estimated relationship, half-sibling. Lily stared at it as if it might change if she didn't blink. That has to be wrong, she whispered. Some glitch. You turned the screen toward her. Mom. It's not just the name. Look. There was a small profile photo. A woman about your age. Dark curls. Hazel eyes. The likeness was uncanny. Lily's face went pale. She reached out, then jerked her hand back as if the screen were hot. Mom, you said softly, turning to me. Do you know something about this? I had imagined this moment 1,000 times in 1,000 different ways. In none of them did I feel ready. Lily's gaze snapped to my face. Did you? She asked. Her voice was flat, but her eyes burned. Know what? I whispered, already knowing the answer. About him, she said. About Charles. About her. The kitchen felt smaller, the air thick. The hum of the refrigerator was suddenly deafening. I saw them, I said finally. On your wedding day. The words hung there, decades late and far too heavy. Lily's chair scraped back. You, what? I couldn't meet her eyes. So I looked at you instead, my granddaughter, my unintended witness. There was a woman, I said. In the anteroom with Charles and Pastor Allen. She said she was his wife. She had a little girl with her. I swallowed. Your father and I, Ruth. The pastor. We believed him when he said the divorce was almost final. That stopping the wedding would only make things worse. Worse than marrying a bigamist? Lily's voice cracked on the last word. Tears blurred my vision. We thought we were protecting you, I whispered. From humiliation. From scandal. We told ourselves it would all be sorted soon. That what you didn't know couldn't hurt you. She laughed then, a sharp, broken sound. What I didn't know, she said. Mom, don't you see? I knew something was wrong. I felt it. I have spent my entire marriage trying to name a ghost I didn't have words for. She pressed her palms into her eyes, then dropped them, looking at me with more age in her face than I'd ever seen. How could you stand there and watch me say, I do, and not tell me who I was tying my life to? I was a coward, I said. The truth of it burned, but I owed her that much. I was afraid of Ruth's anger, of the town's gossip, of your father's disappointment. I didn't want you left alone at that altar. I didn't want to see you hurt. You didn't want to see me hurt, she repeated slowly. But you were okay with me being hurt where you didn't have to look at it. The words landed like a slap I deserved. You were silent, eyes wide, absorbing a history that had shaped your whole life without your knowledge. What about her? You asked finally, voice barely more than a whisper. Emily, you said, nodding at the screen. What about her? Did Dad know? Did he talk about her? Lily laughed bitterly. He talked about the past, she said. Whenever I asked for specifics, he shut down. He said he had made his choice and he was trying to be a good husband and father now. As if doing the right thing 30 years too late erased what he'd done at the start. She looked at me again. And you helped him, she said. All of you. You let me be the only one in the room who didn't know the lines of the play. There it was, the heart of it. Not just the betrayal of Charles's legal status, but the betrayal of trust between a mother and daughter. Between generations. I am so sorry, I said. The words felt too small, too smooth for the jagged thing I was trying to hand her. Sorry doesn't give me back my wedding day, she said quietly. It doesn't give Emily her father. It doesn't give you your integrity. She wiped at her cheeks. But it does give us a place to start, she added, almost to herself. You blinked. Start what? You asked. Deciding what we do next, Lily said. That night was not tidy. There was no group hug, no magical wash of forgiveness. Lily spent an hour pacing the kitchen, sometimes furious, sometimes numb, sometimes telling stories about small moments that suddenly made sense. Charles disappearing on Saturday afternoons to run errands, Ruth's panic whenever anyone mentioned certain neighborhoods where Joanna was rumored to live. You alternated between shock and curiosity, your laptop still open to Emily's profile. She wrote me a message, you said finally. Before I came over. I didn't open it yet. It just says, "Hi, I think we might be related." The words on the screen pulsed with a quiet bravery. Do you want to read it together? You asked your mother. Lily hesitated. Then she nodded. You clicked. Emily's message was simple. I grew up knowing my dad had another family. I never knew if they knew about me. I've spent a lot of years being angry, and a lot of years just tired. I don't want to blow up anyone's life. I just want to know if I was real to him. If I'm real to you. That word again. Real. Lily covered her mouth with her hand. I don't know if I can forgive him, she said. He's not even here to answer for any of this. He left me with the mess and no explanations. She looked at you. But she didn't do anything wrong, she said. Neither did you. She turned to me. Can I forgive you? She asked softly. I don't know. Not yet. Maybe not in the way you want. But I also don't want to be the kind of woman who keeps another woman out in the cold just because someone told her to. Forgiveness, it turns out, is not a single door you walk through. It's a hallway with many doors, some you open, some you pass by, some you don't even see until years later. What did each of us need to even start walking down that hallway? Lily needed acknowledgement. Not vague regrets, but clear ownership of what we'd done. So I sat with her, over many afternoons, and told her every detail I had, Joanna's face in that anteroom, the sound of Emily's voice saying, Daddy, the way Frank's hand felt heavy on my shoulder when he said, not today. I didn't excuse myself. I didn't say, but. I let the shame sit between us like a third presence. You needed space. You spent weeks thinking, talking with friends, reading old journals where you'd written about strange tensions at home you'd never understood. Then, one Sunday, you came over with your laptop and said, I wrote her back. Emily. You showed us the message before you hit send. Hi Emily, I think you're right. I'm Lily's daughter. I didn't know about you growing up. I'm still figuring out how I feel. But I know this, if we're related, then you're real to me. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. Lily read it, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Send it, she whispered. It wasn't magic. Emily didn't appear on our doorstep the next day. Years of pain don't evaporate because someone wrote a kind message. But she did respond. She and you started with emails. Stories about childhoods lived on parallel tracks, yours with camping trips and piano recitals, hers with secondhand school clothes and a mother working double shifts. You found small overlaps, you both loved the same obscure band as teenagers. You both hated tomatoes. You both had a scar on your left knee from falling off a bike at age 8. Sometimes, the conversations skirted around him. Around Charles. Around what he had been to each of you. But slowly, bravely, you began to talk about that too. One day, years after that kitchen table revelation, I sat in a coffee shop and watched something I never thought I'd live to see. Lily and Emily, sitting across from each other. Emily was in her 40s now, laugh lines at the corners of her eyes, her dark curls threaded with silver. Lily had more gray than brown in her hair, her hands spotted with age. Between them sat 2 mugs and a stack of napkins already damp with tears. I sat at a respectful distance, far enough not to intrude, close enough that if either of them needed an anchor, I could be there. I watched as Lily pushed a photograph across the table. Her wedding day. "You deserve to know," she said. "Everything I know about him. The good and the terrible." Emily picked up the photo, studied it. "He looks young," she said. "So was I," Lily replied. They talked for 3 hours. About Charles, the father who had been there for every science fair in your life and the one who had missed most of hers. About Joanna, who had died a few years earlier, never having seen this day. About the ways silence had twisted all of us in different directions. When they stood up, they hugged. It was not a Hollywood reconciliation. You could see the stiffness at first, the caution. But you could also see something else. 2 women refusing to let a dead man's choices dictate their living connection any longer. Later, Lily would tell me, "I will never forgive him fully. But I don't have to forgive him to show her kindness." And me? What did forgiveness look like for a woman who had kept the worst secret of her daughter's life? I didn't ask for it. That was the first step. I told Lily, "You don't owe me forgiveness. Not in this lifetime. I will carry what I did, and what I failed to do, until my last day. The only thing I ask is that you don't let my mistake teach you to lie to yourself." She looked at me for a long time. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Mom," she said. "But I also don't want my last years with you to be this. A wall." So we did something small at first. We started telling the truth about little things. How many times I'd wanted to run into that anteroom but hadn't. How afraid she had been on her wedding day but hadn't known why. How angry you still were on some nights, even as you forged a new relationship with Emily. Truth became our way of honoring what we couldn't fix. On the anniversary of that June day, instead of pretending it was only a celebration, we began to name it as both. The day Lily gained a husband and the day we all lost something we couldn't get back. We didn't force forgiveness. We made space for it to grow, or not, in its own time. Sometimes, the best we could do was sit together in the late afternoon light, hands wrapped around mugs of tea, and let the silence be honest for once. Now, I'm at the tail end of my story. The doctor says my heart is weaker than it should be. It seems fitting, after all these years. Maybe that's why I'm speaking now, to you, to whoever is listening out there. Because for so long, I thought silence was a kind of love. A way of sheltering the people I cared about from storms they didn't need to stand in. But here's what I've learned. The truth doesn't erase the past, but it can change the ending. Keeping the secret didn't stop the hurt. It just made sure it arrived in the dark, when no one saw it coming. If I had spoken up on that hot June day in 1974, Lily's life would have shattered differently. Maybe she would have borne the humiliation of a broken engagement. Maybe she would have cried for months. Maybe people would have whispered. But she would have known that her mother stood beside her when the world caved in, instead of holding the ceiling up for a man who had no right to be in that church at all. I can't go back and choose differently. All I can do is leave you with this. If you are carrying a secret like the one I carried, one that stands between your love and the people you love, ask yourself. Are you really protecting them? Or are you just postponing the moment they find out who you truly are? Sometimes, forgiveness can bloom even in barren ground. I've seen it in the way Lily pats my hand now when I tell this story, instead of pulling away. I've seen it in the way you and Emily laugh together at family picnics, your children chasing each other across the grass with no idea why their mothers once stood on opposite sides of a shadow. It's not perfect. Some wounds stay tender when the weather changes. Some questions will never be answered. But there is a kind of peace I never expected, the peace of no longer pretending. If this story sits heavy in your chest, If it reminds you of something in your own life, maybe it's time to open a window in that locked room. Before I let you go, I want to ask you for something simple. If this story moved you, if it made you think of the dust of your own old days, tap that like button so others can find it, and share it with someone who might need to hear they're not alone. And if you want to sit with more long, tangled, honest stories like this, grandmother-style truths, family dramas, and the kind of memories that stick to your ribs, subscribe to Dust of Old Days. We can't change what's already happened, but we can choose how we remember it. And sometimes, telling the story out loud is the first true act of forgiveness we ever offer ourselves. Thank you for listening. Take care of your heart. And don't let silence write your family's ending for you.